he makes it digestible, which is nice.
That's true. I remember, yeah, I remember when I heard him speak like the first time.
Yeah, he was surprisingly riveting. Yes. I don't mean to insult people, but yes. On time. Let's do it, friends.
It's like, I know, but it's just like, it's kind of dramatic neck. A turtleneck, that is. Yeah. All right, good afternoon. We're going to start off with our guests today. If we could put them up on the screen, that would be great. Mr. Tom. They're talking. Can you hear us? Abdallah, can you, there we go. All right.
Yes,
perfect.
I can hear you. Yeah,
okay.
I can hear you and see you, Stefan.
Perfect. I can see you. As long as we can hear and see each other, the rest is just extra. All right. Good afternoon. We are delighted to be joined by our friend, Abdallah al-Dardari, who, as you know, is the director of the Regional Bureau for Arab States at the UN Development Program. And he is here he's rather in Amman, in Jordan, to brief you on the launch of UNDP's report entitled War in Gaza, Expected Socioeconomic Impacts on the State of Palestine. So, Abdallah, you have the floor, and then we'll take some questions.
Thank you very much. This is a second joint report, UNESCWA UNDP, assessing the socioeconomic impact of the war in Gaza. If you remember, in November 2023, we issued a report indicating the losses in the GDP, in poverty, in unemployment, in human development. And now, after more than 6 months of fighting, we are updating our figures and our projections. And now the new time horizon is up to 9 months of impact. The impact has been increasing in an exponential manner. And therefore, for example, only in GDP had lost already 25% compared to the pre-war projections by 6 months of fighting, and the loss is expected to reach 29% if the fighting continues for 9 months. The same could be established on household consumption and poverty. Household consumption increased by 35% at least, and if the fighting continues for 9 months, the drop in household consumption will reach more than 38%. Poverty rate, which is a staggering poverty rate, has already increased from 38% to 60%, to more than 60% in the first 6 months of the fighting. and expected to increase even further should the fighting continue for 9 months. Unemployment rate in all of the Palestinian territories have increased from 25% before the war to 46% now, and expected and could reach more than 48% if the fighting continues for 9 months. Most importantly, the Human Development Index for Palestine in general, not just for Gaza, for Palestinian territories, East Jerusalem, West Bank, and Gaza, have regressed by 20 years. And for Gaza alone, it has regressed by more than 40 years. We are back in the 80s almost for Gaza. So all the investments in human development in the Palestinian territories in the last 20 years and in Gaza in the last 40 years have been wiped out. We are putting out this report just to highlight that every day, every additional day of fighting is only causing the price and cost of rebuilding Gaza, something we are, as UN, already planning to do and planning to support and working together as one UN in order to be ready for that moment. This price of rebuilding is increasing also exponentially by every day of fighting. Let me stop here, Stefan, and give the floor back to you.
Thank you very much on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association for doing this briefing. My name is Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. A couple of follow-up questions. Could you spell out for us in more graphic detail what the pushback in Gaza to 40 years to what Gaza was like in the 80s means in terms of the loss to people? What's changed, and what are they going to find when this war ends? And secondly, is there even any preliminary estimate of the cost of rebuilding, and is the UN coordinating with countries in the region, other big donors, the private sector? Thank you.
Thank you. Please go ahead, Abdallah. Shall I answer this one now, Stefan?
Yes, please. Please, thank you.
Yes, sure. Thank you very much. When we say Human Development Index regressed by 40 years, we are talking about all the gains in schools, in years of schooling, in educational attainment, in health, expected life expectancy at birth, and GNP per capita having regressed to those levels of the 1980s. I mean, and in our estimate, these are almost an investment of $50 billion lost. That means that the levels of education and literacy will be affected dramatically at the end of this conflict, but more dangerously in our analysis, that the impact of the conflict will stay with us for a long time unless we quickly address temporary schooling, temporary health facilities, psychosocial support to the population, bringing back basic services like water and sanitation and electricity. So the challenge has increased dramatically. The same for the West Bank and East Jerusalem. In a sense, the economic recovery will take a long time and a lot of investments. You asked me about how much in a preliminary figure. An early recovery program for 3 years to bring back hundreds of thousands of Palestinians to temporary shelters in their original locations with comprehensive community support will cost between $2 to $3 billion. The overall reconstruction of Gaza today, according to our estimate, will be between $40 to $50 billion at least. That's the challenge we are facing. But the challenge, if I may, is that we have today 37 million tons of debris that needs to be removed, managed, recycled to allow space for those temporary shelters and other structures to be established in order to resume normal life, some sort of normalcy for the Palestinians in Gaza.
Thank you. Anade, then Joe.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Al-Dardari. It's Nadi Situma for Al Jazeera English. Lovely to see you. My question is, you spoke about the UN family preparing to rebuild Gaza as a unit, as the one family. And I wanted to ask, what is your office's relationship with the Office of Sigrid Kaag, particularly her mandate for reconstruction? Will there be a representative from UNDP in the office that has been established in Gaza under Sigrid Kaag's mandate?
Thank you very much. In fact, I will not be revealing any secrets if I said that we just finished a long day meeting headed by Sigrid Kaag, Muhannad Hadi, the new RCHC, and 22 UN agencies, the regional directors and the country representatives in the occupied Palestinian territories. And we went through all the preparations by each agency, building a common framework for early recovery, which will prepare for reconstruction. To say today that we have a reconstruction plan is too early, but we are on the verge of developing and finalizing a unified UN early recovery framework that is Palestinian-centered, Palestinian-led, and owned by the Palestinian people. As of our representative in Sigrid Kaag's team, yes, we have a D1 seconded from UNDP to her team.
Thank you. Joe, then Ephraim, then Michelle.
Yeah, Joseph Klein, Canada Free Press. Do you have data on GDP and unemployment going back to 2005 when Israel unilaterally withdrew from Gaza, to compare that to those same metrics before the current war in Gaza and now? Do you have that kind of data, and if so, could you share it with us?
Unfortunately, I was not prepared for this answer, for this question, but if you give me a couple of days, I will share them with you directly.
Okay. Thank you. We'll make sure you're in touch. Ephraim, then Michelle.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dardari. It says in the report that the level of destruction in Gaza is such that the required assistance would be on a scale not seen since 1948 in terms of rebuilding public infrastructure, schools, hospitals, and other facilities. Can you please elaborate a little bit on that and this parallelism between 1948 and now? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think just to mention the number of 37 million tons of debris, to compare, in the 2014 war, 51 days of fighting, we had 2.4 million tons of debris. So now we have 37 million tons. 72% of all housing in Gaza has been destroyed, and 9% of all other commercial and other buildings have been destroyed. This is unprecedented. And when we say, even we can say compared to, we haven't seen anything like this since 1945, since Second World War. That intensity in such a short time and the massive scale of destruction.
Thank you. Michelle, then Maggie.
Thanks so much for the briefing. Michelle Nichols with Reuters. There's a line in the report about fiscal disruption and talking about the amount of money that the bank's getting in this deal with Norway to hang on to it. Can you give us any sort of idea of what the cash flow liquidity of the banks is like at the moment in Gaza?
Very good point. So first of all, most, if not all, bank branches in Gaza have been destroyed. And on the overall level of the Palestinian economy, we have hundreds of thousands of staff in the Palestinian Authority who have not been paid for more than 6 months. That means they have been borrowing against the guarantees of their salaries. And in case they don't receive their salaries, the ratio of non-performing loans in the Palestinian banking sector will shoot up, threatening the whole viability of that banking sector. And we are doing our best, again, as UN, as UNDP, to have rapid interventions to ensure that we protect the banking sector from collapse. On the fiscal space, we know that the Palestinian authorities have received 60% less this year from its tax and customs revenues compared to last year. So at the overall level, macro, fiscal, and monetary, the situation is very dire.
So just a quick follow-up. Like just on a very, basic level, like can people get money out of the banks? Is there money to be had? Is there money to be withdrawn?
In Gaza, it's impossible. That's why we are developing digital payment systems. In the West Bank, yes, there's still cash in the banks and they can still withdraw, but people are reaching the limits of what type of credit facilities they can get from the banks. So it's not a question of cash per se, but it's a question of facilities that could be extended to people, and we believe that they are reaching their limits.
Thank you. Maggie?
Hi, it's Margaret Bashir from Voice of America. In November, you told us that you were predicting a 12% GDP loss in 2023. So it came in less at 8.7%, correct? So why do you think that was? It's a significant difference because the war has been very bad by any metric. So how did the GDP kind of do better?
Well, we have to consider that when you work with models and simulations, these things can happen. And now we have much better data from the ground. We have the World Bank, EU, UN interim damage assessment. We can now know much better how much the damage and the GDP impact assessment is. We have a much better understanding of the overall fiscal and macroeconomic impact, and that explains why there is this difference in the numbers. We are looking at the overall order of magnitude of the impact, and therefore we believe, and I believe, the idea is that the impact is exponential. It has not yet reached the diminishing returns low, and the marginal impact is still increasing, unfortunately. That explains why the damage could reach up to, the loss to GDP could reach up to 29% if the fighting continues to 9 months.
Okay.
One second.
Oh, sorry. Just another follow-up. In the report, it said there was a 26.7% poverty rate before the war, but I didn't see really a number of people. I'm just trying to figure out how many more people, as opposed to percentages, are in poverty now. I'm not good at math. I'm sorry.
In fact, I'll provide you that number. I don't know why this number we should have, but we are saying that there's 1.8 million additional people who fell into poverty since the beginning of the war. So the total number of the poor I will share with you immediately after we finish. I'm sorry that it didn't print out in the report.
And that's all Palestine, right? There's no breakout Gaza, West Bank. Okay. And wait, I think I had one more. Sorry, I probably have 20 questions, but I have one more I just want to be sure I ask you. So what you were saying to Michelle about the banks, would you say they're on the brink of collapse then because there's so much debt leveraged and loans? If people can't pay them back, will they collapse?
If people pay back, no, but don't forget the banking sector depends on the commercial activities, on the overall economic activities. So, for example, the construction sector lost 72% of its growth rates in the last 7 months. So the banking sector has been affected very negatively, not just by the individuals withdrawing loans against their salaries, but also against where the tourism sector has stopped. Trading has been affected, construction and other economic and sectors, industry and manufacturing have been badly affected, which leads to an increased number of non-performing loans. I don't like to use the term on the verge of collapse. People's deposits are in the banks, and we need to be careful what we say about those banks.
And you mentioned the construction. so it's the worst performing sector right now, but when the war ends, it could feasibly become the best performing sector because of the reconstruction that's going to be needed. So will that basically fuel the economy once the war stops and provide jobs and I mean, are you looking to that sector to kind of turn things around, I guess?
As part of our early recovery planning, we are already doing all the simulations for the recovery. So which sectors will contribute to the recovery, what positive impact we would have then on GDP growth, on employment, on poverty, and all the other indicators that we presented today. And once we have that integrated formula for recovery, we will be ready to present it as well.
Thank you. Augusta Abdelhamid, then I'll go back to you, Joe.
Thank you, Dr. Dardari. This is Augusta Saraiva with Bloomberg News. So I wanted to go back to that 40 to 50 billion figure that you mentioned for the cost of reconstruction. What kind of conversations are you having about where that money would come from? I know Sigrid Kaag had conversations with Palestinian investors earlier this week, met with the Bank of Palestine, but who else are you targeting at this point?
At the moment, we are focusing on the early recovery phase. While we have rough estimates of the total cost of reconstruction, our main concern is to be ready on any possible day after, to bring in, at least, as I said, the temporary shelters and all the other necessary basic services with them. And in our assessment, this will cost between $2 to $3 billion in the first 3 years. And that is at least what we are doing as UNDP at the moment in resource mobilization. We are focusing on this phase. And then we are receiving very positive responses from all corners.
Thank you. Abdelhamid?
Thank you so much. I hope you hear me well.
Yes.
مرحبا أخي عبدالله تحيات.
أهلا أخي عبدالله.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes.
Go ahead.
5% of all the people in Gaza had been completely annihilated, either killed, wounded, or buried under the rubble. If you can shed more light on the division of this 5%, that's one thing. The second, could you shed more light about the destruction of all the educational system, the 8 universities and probably more than 170 schools? If you can give us more details about the destruction of the educational system. And the last thing about famine, and I don't know where we stand in terms of famine in Gaza now, if you can address that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We know that a large number of schools and universities have been fully or partially destroyed to the point where we can say that there is no longer an educational system, infrastructure and superstructure in Gaza. The exact numbers are changing every day. That's why we wanted to give orders of magnitude here rather than just give a very specific number on a building or on a structure, because we reached a point where it's pointless to say how much more schools have been destroyed. We practically have very, very little schools to talk about. I was impressed a few days ago to see a school resuming and bringing people back. But we are also thinking already of the psychosocial support that children will need in order to be able to go to school, of any school of some sort. And that's why schooling is an extremely important priority for us, and that will be part of this early recovery phase. And what's the impact? Why, when we measure and say 40 years back on 40 years back receding or regression in the HDI, it is mainly from the number of years of schooling that we have lost already. And unfortunately, the impact of the war will continue even after the ceasefire, because the current situation of schooling means that there could be no schooling for tens of thousands of students even after the war is over. That's why it is a very big priority. Yes, 5% of the population has been either killed or badly wounded, and that's again one of the it's an unprecedented level of casualties in a very short time. Usually such levels of casualties take years. This is in a very short time.
Thank you. Joe, and then we'll close it out.
Yeah, Joseph Klein again, Canada Free Press. I just want to go back to the data that I requested and that you said you would supply, and just want to refine it. I'm looking actually for the three metrics that you've emphasized. That would be the unemployment rate, the GDP, and the poverty rate. And I'm looking for a comparison of 2005, 2007, when Hamas took control, right before the October 7th attack, before the war began, the current war began, and now. So that's the comparison I would like, if you can give us the data.
I'll send you a table with those metrics and those 4 time points that you mentioned.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for presenting the report. We wish you well. Safe travels back to New York, and hopefully next time you'll be here in person.
Thank you very much.
Take care, Abdallah. Bye-bye. Okay, back to our regular programming. The Secretary General, as we've told you a number of times, is in Chile to attend the meeting of the Chief Executive Board for Coordination of the United Nations. This afternoon, he will have a bilateral meeting with the President of Chile, Gabriel Boric, and that will be followed by a joint press encounter. That'll be around 6:45 p.m. here in New York. For those of you who are interested, it should be up on our UN Web TV platform. Last night, you saw we issued a statement in which the Secretary General expressed his deep distress at the news of the hundreds of lives lost and many others affected by the heavy flooding in Burundi, in Kenya, Somalia, and Tanzania, as well as other parts of East Africa. The United Nations and its partners are working closely with national authorities to address the humanitarian requirements. The Secretary General stresses that the United Nations stands ready to offer any additional assistance that may be needed during this very difficult period. The Secretary General is extremely concerned about the impacts of El Niño-triggered extreme weather, which risks further devastating communities and undermining livelihoods. In that regard, the Martin Griffiths, our emergency relief coordinator, has released $13.5 million from the Central Emergency Response Fund to shore up support to address El Niño-induced disasters in southern Africa. The funds will go towards providing food, cash, support for irrigation systems, drought-resistant seeds for farmers, for planting, among other assistance. This latest allocation brings the total amount earmarked to confront El Niño crisis globally to more than $60 million. And staying in the region and turning to Madagascar, we have a humanitarian update for you on the response following the passage of Tropical Cyclone Gaman in late March. The storm impacted more than 530,000 men, women, and children. Hundreds of houses and schools and health centers were flooded and damaged. We continue to support the government of Madagascar-led response, focusing on the health response due to the risk of epidemics following the storm. Humanitarian organizations have provided medicine, mosquito nets, water purification products. They're also providing training on water treatment. The education sector is also a priority, as it is the last semester of school. Humanitarian aid organizations have distributed tents for temporary classrooms for students. Our colleagues from OCHA say that access to some areas remains challenging, as the national road connecting the northeast, one of the most affected regions, is still cut off. Both humanitarian supplies and staff need to be transported by sea or air, which, as you can imagine, increases the cost of the response. Humanitarian partners are calling for additional funds to support relief efforts. The flash appeal for Madagascar, which will require $90 million this year, is under 13% funded, with only $11.5 million in the bank. Moving to Sudan, our humanitarian colleagues say they are deeply concerned about the humanitarian crisis that is ongoing there. A group of 10 emergency directors from UN agencies and non-governmental organizations wrapped up a joint mission to Sudan today to sound the alarm over the absolutely devastating situation across the country, including catastrophic food insecurity levels and a growing risk of famine. Humanitarians urgently need to expand access across conflict lines and borders to reach people in need wherever they are. They also need more resources. Despite generous pledges made in Paris about 2 weeks ago at the conference there, the Sudan humanitarian appeal remains only 10% funded. Our colleagues are deeply disturbed by the situation for civilians in and around El Fasher, where clashes and tensions have escalated. We're particularly alarmed about restrictions on civilian movements and reports that civilians are being attacked and robbed while attempting to flee south from the capital of North Darfur State. Fighting in and around the city has already cut off humanitarian access to civilians who desperately need assistance. If the violence in El Fasher escalates, more than 360,000 people will be deprived of food assistance and livelihood support, and more than 100,000 will lose out on shelter assistance. It could also have a negative impact on our humanitarian access to other states in the Darfur region. And just to flag that tomorrow, Friday, we will be joined virtually by Lenny Kinsley from Nairobi. She is the World Food Programme spokesperson for Sudan, and she will brief you in more detail on the situation in Darfur and El Fasher. Turning to the situation in Gaza, our humanitarian colleagues continue to warn about the catastrophic impact that a potential ground invasion in Rafah could have, especially on the civilians and obviously on the aid operation that supports those civilians. Rafah is at the heart of our Gaza humanitarian operations. It is a transshipment point for life-saving assistance that arrives in Gaza from the Rafah and the Kerem Shalom crossings. It is where dozens of aid organizations store the life-saving supplies they deliver to civilians across the Gaza Strip. Among other things, our colleagues from the UN Population Fund operate clinics for sexual and reproductive health at field hospitals in Rafah. UNICEF and partners are providing outpatient treatment for acutely malnourished children at more than 50 sites in Rafah. The World Food Programme and its partners are distributing nutrition supplements to children under 5 and pregnant and breastfeeding women in Rafah. 3 of UNRWA's 8 health centers in Gaza are in Rafah. They provide primary care, medication, vaccination, pre- and postnatal services, and wound dressings for injured patients. Most importantly, there are hundreds of thousands of civilians who fled to Rafah to escape bombardment, famine, and disease. For them, a ground operation would mean more suffering. Civilians must be protected, and international humanitarian law must be respected by all. Moving to Syria, where we are told that extreme weather there has left thousands of people in the northwest of the country in urgent needs of tents and other shelter support. In Idlib and northern Aleppo, nearly 2,500 people were heavily impacted by the rainfall. Some 250 tents and more than 180 shelters were damaged. Our colleagues at OCHA say that among those working to assess the damage and our partners on the ground are distributing tents, mattresses, blankets, insulators, and other assistance. We, along with our partners, have been working to move some 800,000 men, women, and children in northwest Syria to safer and more durable shelters. That's while amid recurrent flooding since the start of the year. However, the funding shortfalls are challenging efforts to provide support in the area. Just 8% of the $1.4 billion needed for the cross-border humanitarian response in northwest Syria is in the bank. And moving up to Europe and Ukraine, the humanitarian coordinator for the United Nations in Ukraine, Denise Brown, was in the Kharkiv region in the east of the country today, where she condemned the recent wave of attacks on the region. Attacks have also continued for a third day in a row in Odessa, causing dozens of civilian casualties and damage to civilian infrastructure. That's according to what local authorities are telling us. Our humanitarian partners have warned about the impact of the increase in attacks on education institutions and health facilities in recent months. In the first 4 months of this year alone, nearly 90 schools were damaged in attacks across the country. That's what our partners are telling us, and humanitarian organizations are mobilized and are providing emergency repair, materials, psychological and legal assistance to those who need it. Almost lastly, the Secretary General's personal envoy for Cyprus, Maria Angela Holgun, will undertake her third visit to Cyprus, and that will take place from the 7th to the 14th of May of this year. During the visit, she is expected to meet with the Greek Cypriot and the Turkish Cypriot leaders, as well as a broad range of additional interlocutors. Before the visit to Cyprus, she traveled to Brussels for meeting with European Union officials, as well as to other relevant capitals. And today is World Tuna Day. Don't roll your eyes at me, Edie Lederer. The fish has some amazing qualities. It's rich in omega-3, contains minerals, proteins, and vitamin B12, among other advantages. However, it is threatened by the overwhelming demand. And I'm part of that overwhelming demand because I love tuna. But we need to fish sustainably. This day highlights the importance of the conservation of management of tuna. Edie, the big tuna.
Thank you. I have to say I do like tuna.
Yes, exactly.
On Sudan and what's happening around El Fasher, can you tell us what Mr. Lamamra is doing? Is he trying to get a lot of the key players to together with the two generals to actually try and bring an end to at least this offensive and the broader conflict?
I mean, that's the aim. He has been talking to various parties and those who have influence over the parties, and he will continue his activities in that regard.
Can we get a more granular update on
Yes,
what's happening
with him?
With that?
Yep.
Thanks. I'll come back with it.
Okay. Joe, then Anade, then Benno.
Yes, first, in honor of this International Tuna Day, I'm going to have tuna casserole tonight, so
Excellent.
Just wanted to let you know. Anyway, on a more serious note, there is a ceasefire proposal on the table, and Israel's offer of a 6-week ceasefire, reducing the number of hostages it is demanding or asking to be released, and proposing a much larger number of Palestinian prisoners to be released. It's been described as very generous by the U.S. and the U.K. Does the Secretary General have any message for Hamas to accept this proposal? So far, indications are that it is reluctant to accept the proposal.
Well, I mean, you're listing a proposal that the Secretary General has not seen. We are not a party to these negotiations. We've seen different variations of it in the press. The Secretary General's message, as he delivered it on Tuesday, is for the parties to agree to a humanitarian ceasefire, to agree to release all of the hostages, to agree for greater humanitarian access. So we are not party to the agreement. We have not seen the proposals. We've seen press reports. We want to see an agreement, and I think he was much more eloquent than I'm being in his expressing his opinion on Tuesday.
But it looks like, from all reports, it is Hamas that's standing in the way. Israel has made several offers, and Hamas so far has said no unless it gets its way. So
we're basing this discussion on press reports, unless you have seen the agreement. I have not, so since I don't have the details of it, I'm just reiterating what the Secretary General has said. Benno.
Thank you, Benno.
I'd like to have some authority here. No, I'm going to go with Benno. I know. I changed my mind. Benno, go ahead. No, go. Go, Benno, go. No.
God, I feel so bad. Thank you for bringing me in that situation. Switzerland announced the Ukraine peace summit for 15th and 16th of June. Who will go for the United Nations?
I don't have any details for you to share at this point.
And the second thing, the EU wants to pay Lebanon around €1 billion to stop migration of Syrian refugees to Cyprus and the EU. Do you have any comment to this?
Look, I think it is, whatever decisions are taken on efforts to, I would use the term manage the flow of human beings, whether they be migrants or refugees, needs to be done in a holistic manner that deals with the countries of origin, the countries of destination, and the countries of transit.
So you mean this is not holistic enough?
I haven't seen all the details. I'm just stating my principles. Nade.
Hi, thank you, Steph. Thank you, Benno. I wanted to follow up on Edie's question. She asked about any progress has been made with negotiations between the RSF and the SAF on completely stopping the fighting and a ceasefire. But my question is, after today, you said that 10 emergency directors from UN agencies had a mission today. Has there been any progress on maybe just cross-line negotiations, on just aid access, maybe not a whole end of the conflict?
As far as I know, there's not been sufficient progress. Maggie, then Michelle, then Deji.
Following up on Sudan, where in Sudan did the 10 emergency directors go? Because it's very hard to move around. So do you know where they went?
No, I do not, but I will get you an answer shortly.
Thank you.
Yep. Go ahead.
Excellent. Sorry, just 3 quick questions on Gaza aid. Has the UN had any communications from Israel on how imminent an assault on Rafah might be?
We are not privy to their military operations.
They gave a warning in October when they were going to go in. You've had nothing. Okay. And on the pier, the US-led pier, has there been any has the UN resolved what their involvement will be in helping deliver the aid?
Excuse me, those discussions are also ongoing.
And then last question, from Rafah, how many people has the UN been observed leaving in recently? Leaving Rafah and leaving Gaza. Like, has there been a surge in people leaving ahead of...
Going back north?
Well, or leaving, crossing into Egypt, maybe.
I don't have those numbers. I'm not aware that we've seen any large movements of people. Deji, sorry.
Yes, a couple of questions, Steph. Starting with Syria border crossings. This February, Syrian government grant permission for UN to use Arai and Baba Salama border crossings, and that mandate is due to expire on 13th of May. Is there any update on the negotiations?
I think as we said last week, our OCHA colleagues are very much in contact with the Syrian government to ensure the continuation of that.
But generally speaking, how's the border crossing operations now?
I mean, they're working.
They're working.
They're underfunded, but they're working. Yes.
Okay, good. Second question. It's been reported that Colombia might cut diplomatic ties with Israel because of the Gaza conflict. Any positions from the Secretary General?
The issue of bilateral relations is a bilateral issue. Stefano.
Thank you, Stefan. After what happened in the last few hours with the students in California, would the Secretary General perhaps like to clarify better what he said earlier about the protests, that when freedom of expression must be respected and when not?
I think the Secretary General, I think, was very clear and was using very clear words when he spoke about this on Tuesday. Alan.
Thank you, Stefan. I have a question on Ukraine. Today, it marks 10 years since one of the milestones that triggered the Ukrainian conflict. I'm speaking of the situation on May 2, 2014 on the Odessa Trade Union's house. As you know, that day nationalists locked up in the house the pro-federalism protesters, and then the house was set on fire. About 50 people were killed there. Over 200, I guess almost 250 people injured. Still no results for the investigation, no accountability. Is the UN advocating for the proper, thorough investigation of this tragedy?
Back in, at the time, the then Secretary General issued a statement in which he called for swift and conclusive investigation. And since then, our colleagues in the Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine have also issued similar statements. And I would encourage you to check with our, excuse me, check with our human rights colleagues if they've anything had to say. But there've been updates from them calling for an investigation.
But nobody was brought to justice since then.
There are a lot of cases around the world where we have called for investigations and there's been no accountability, very sadly. Edie.
Thank you, Steph. On aid getting into northern Gaza, there had been somewhere around 200 trucks getting in per day. Mm-hmm. Are the aid, the food, the other items from those trucks actually being delivered, or are they still being held up because of fighting?
I mean, a lot of the goods that are able to cross from Israel into Gaza are not in a position to be delivered because of the obstacles that we've been mentioning repeatedly. Abdelhamid.
Thank you, Stefan. I have two questions. One on Egypt. There were 14 young women, mostly women, demonstrated in support of Gaza in front of a UN office in Cairo. They were all arrested. Is the UN involved? Do they follow the case because they were in front of the UN office? Any UN official following the case?
I will check with our office in Cairo. I was not aware, but whether it's in Egypt or anywhere else, we continue to believe in the right for people to express themselves peacefully. Your second question.
The second, yes, yesterday the House of Representatives in the U.S. voted 320 to 91 to adopt the ERA definition of anti-Semitism, which mixes the criticism of Israel and label it as anti-Semitism. Do you have any opinion on that?
No, we don't. We're not in the business of commenting on laws that are going through a process. It is not. As far as I know, it has not passed through all the.
But do you agree that criticizing Israel is not any?
I have no comment. I will just tell. I'm not commenting on the law. I will just tell you that in terms of the UN, there is no. Member states have not agreed to an official written definition of anti-Semitism, just like terrorism. However, that has not prevented the Secretary General and various Secretariat entities to be consistent in our position against anti-Semitism and his call for member states to counter anti-Semitism. I will leave it at that. I wish you a good day, a good afternoon, and my good colleague, Mr. Huck, will be here tomorrow. I'm going tuna fishing. Oh, sorry, one more thing. The emergency directors were in Port Sudan only.